Welcome to Hollywood and Sip. I'm your host, Kat Smith, and with me today is Peter Nelson, the filmmaker behind the Pollinators. How are you doing today?
Great, I'm doing fine. It's great to see you, Kat.
Good to see you too. You were here, was it 2019 with the Sonoma International Film Festival?
Yes, we were.
And you've done a lot since then. I'm going to let you cover what you've been up to.
Yeah, it's been a busy year. We had a long and wonderful festival run after Sonoma, and we ended up playing at about 30 film festivals total, which was great, and just had a wonderful time. We did a theatrical run of the film as well through Demand Film, and we've also done a lot of community screenings. Of course, it all changed as soon as the pandemic hit. And we've just come out digitally, which is great.
And you are the director of photography, the director, and the producer of the Pollinators. So why don't you give us kind of a nutshell overview of what the film is?
Yeah, so I should also say that I am those, but I'm one of three producers, but I'm also a beekeeper. And so that's an important part of the story. And so I made a journey around the United States, meeting up with commercial migratory beekeepers to talk about the importance of managed honeybees to our food system. And we traveled over 14 states in over a year of pollination. We ended up filming about 90 days. And then we edited all that down into a feature-length documentary film.
Which the editing process must be crazy, because that's a lot of footage to get down to just that little nugget of film.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was I think we ended up with a couple hundred hours of footage, and both documentary, verite footage, drone footage, a lot of super slow motion, macro footage, and so it was a big laborious process to get to that, but it was wonderful. Of course I saw it all when I was filming it, but then I went through and I watched it again and again and logged everything, so I had a really tight understanding of what everything was and where it was.
Just out of curiosity, so you're a beekeeper. How many bees do you personally have compared to how many bees did you follow around the country?
Yeah, so I'm what is considered a backyard beekeeper or hobbyist beekeeper. And right now I have 4 hives out here in my backyard here in the Hudson Valley of New York. And I never have more than 5. And just as a matter of idea, I'm sort of typical, I think, probably for a backyard beekeeper. The beekeepers that I was working with carried around and moved bees all over the country on semi-trucks. And, the largest beekeeper in the country, Brett Eddy, he has somewhere close to 100,000 hives. And so the scale of this was really interesting to me. And just the logistics along with moving that many bees around for pollination is just incredible.
And I'm leading up to how many times were you stung during the filming?
Yeah. I stopped. Getting stung is not uncommon for a beekeeper. The bees. I should say the bees don't like to. Honeybees don't like to sting you because they die when they do sting you. So it's a matter of last resort for them. But when you're dealing with a truckload of honeybees, where you have a million or so bees all on one truck, of course they're not all at the same time. But I stopped counting at 150. Let's just say that.
And I thought about you the other day before getting your email, because for the first time in I think I was stung the first time in my life as a teenager. So this is over 30 years since I had a bee sting. I stepped on a bee the other day and didn't realize, like, the first reaction is, ow, I stepped on a thorn. And then you feel it kind of going through your bloodstream and you're like, oh, that was not a thorn. And I'm like, how? That's so many times you were stung. I can't imagine going through it that many times.
Yeah, it's as a beekeeper, it's kind of goes with the territory, and you get a little bit used to it. For most of us, it lessens over time. And actually, if you have a little bit of arthritis, it might be good to get stung every once in a while in your wrist or knees or whatever. But most people, when they have a experience, and I know I did as a kid, when you get stung repeatedly, it's usually not a honeybee, it's usually a yellow jacket, and they look sort of similar. Hornets and wasps can sting multiple times, and they tend to be more aggressive than honeybees. Honeybees, as I said, just really do not want to sting unless they absolutely have to.
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing about my incident was we realized later somebody's poisoning something in their yard. All of a sudden, we were finding honeybees just in random places in the back and front yard, and I think that's unfortunate. I don't know what they could have been going for that killed the bees also, but I hope that people think about that, because it was just we've had such a lack of bees in our garden for the last couple of years. They were finally coming back, and so it's unfortunate that somebody's going out of their way to cause that.
Yeah, it's actually an important point, and it's something that everybody can do something about. You know, this they're one of the things I really love about this topic is that despite the problems that bees are having, it is a hopeful and actionable film. And one of the things that people can do is think about those things about what they're putting on their own lawns or gardens. And if you have a lawn service, you may want to reconsider that, because they do spray chemicals, and they spray chemicals to that out and out kill insects, but they also spray chemicals that harm insects. And so that's something that people can consider. And it's one of our hopes is that people will take a little time and pay a little bit closer attention to their landscapes and the natural world around them, and maybe consider a dandelion as not necessarily an unwanted plant in their lawn, but as a beautiful source of pollen and nectar for insects. And so that's a very small thing that a lot of people can do and try and refocus their world a little bit.
You know, and that just made me curious about something else about your personal beekeeping. Are you a gardener also? Are your honeybees making magic in your backyard?
Yeah, we do garden. I've gardened my whole life as part of the whole. I grew up as pretty much what I call a free range kid, and so we always had a garden. And my wife and I both like to flower garden and grow vegetables. Excuse me. My wife and I both like to garden and grow vegetables, and when we plant things, we really think and try to think about what those plants, whether it's a plant or a tree, as its pollination or benefit for other wildlife through nuts or whatever else. And those things go together. I always encourage people, if they're going to become a new beekeeper, it's like, if you're going to get a beehive, start a garden, because you have to have the food and the forage for those bees in order for them to do well. And those things are intimately related.
And speaking of trees, one of the farms that you visit is an almond farm, and I think that the season for that is about a month. One of your guests, I can't remember which one said it, but he compared beekeepers to cowboys. Would you like to explain what he was talking about in that segment?
Yeah, so Brett AD is the largest beekeeper in the United States, and he was the one who mentioned beekeepers, kind of the last of the cowboys. And these migratory beekeepers do this really unusual job, is that they move bees around the country for agriculture. And so they truck many trucks worth of honeybees. Are all palletized, 4 or 6 hives on a pallet. And so you'll have a truck that'll have 400 or so hives on it, and they move basically 1 million beehives are moved into the Central Valley every year during almond pollination, for that one pollination event. It's the biggest pollination event in the world. And so these beekeepers are essentially like bee herders or bee movers. So they have they come in on these trucks, and they move them around to the different orchards for the time of the pollination, and then they move them out and they move them to other forage opportunities for many of the other trees that grow the fruits and nuts that we eat, as well as vegetables. So they'll go to cherries and apples and blueberries and cranberries, and there's several hundred fruits and nuts that we commonly eat that are pollinated by bees.
And who are some of the other people that you interview in the film? I feel like everybody in your film is a real character.
Yeah, one of the things I really liked about it is that these beekeepers are great characters, and they're kind of a combination for me of cowboys and ranchers and truckers all wrapped up in one. They're very independent. They're mostly family businesses, and they are really interesting and a lot of fun to be with. Very plain spoken, typically. So we had Brett AD, who I mentioned already, Dave and Davey Hackenberg. They're out of Pennsylvania, and they're family. Most of these operations are family run. And so Glenn Card is another one out of Massachusetts, Zach Browning out of North Dakota, and Jeff Anderson, who's out of California and Minnesota. A lot of the beekeepers have 2 operations for the moving of the bees: a northern operation, and then a southern operation where they can get ramped up for pollination in the spring for almonds. And they're just really interesting, wonderful people that really care about their bees. It's one of the things that I took away from this is that when you're moving, thousands of beehives around, I think some people think that these beekeepers view them as sort of a commodity, and they are considered livestock by the USDA, but the beekeepers really care about these bees and they take care of them. It's in their interest, and they really care about the bees to make sure that they have water when they're traveling, that they pick a route that is either not too hot or too cold, that they get there alive and do well along the way. So there's specialized truckers that move these animals, these bees, like they move animals, like you would move cattle or whatever else around. And so a lot of care goes into it. And it's not the reason why we're having pollinator decline, as some people would think. There are a lot of other factors, but moving them is really not.
I think that's really important too, because I think you can look at those trucks and easily think to yourself that they're not caring for them because they're in these giant trucks, but they really are. And another thing that I thought about while I was watching the almond farms was I feel like maybe they're even extending the life of the animals because, as they mentioned, that's 1 month of feeding, and then there's no crops because there are miles and miles and miles of trees. And once that crop is done, they have no more food. So it's almost like they're not just helping the farmers, but the bees are moving from food source to food source.
Yeah, it's important to note that the reason why they have to move bees in for this pollination is because of the changes in our agriculture. As agriculture after World War II has become more simplified and more monocultures of one crop throughout a year and more chemically dependent, so you have, I'll use almonds as an example because it's the biggest example we have of, there's 1 million acres of almonds in the Central Valley. And during that one period of time of 6-7 weeks, when the trees are in bloom, it's a feast for the bees that are there. The remaining part of the year, there's nothing or very little in bloom. And so native bees can't survive there. And so they have to move bees in as almost an insurance policy, and then move them out onto another crop to do a pollination somewhere else for a similar sort of a crop. And bees, like us, need a source of nutrition throughout the year, a diverse source of nutrition and sequential blooms. And so coming back to what people can do, if you plant your garden, having a succession of plants that bees pollinate throughout a year is really important and makes a difference to not only honeybees, but all the native bees. And there are about 4,000 native bee species in North America.
I think as hobby gardeners, which we are, I find that we plant our garden to pop throughout the year. I think it can be easy to fall into the trap of, oh, I'm just planting for spring. But really, if you think about it, and especially in Sonoma Valley, we are so lucky that we don't have any major climate differences. You have a little winter, a little summer, but for the most part, we can plant year round. And so I think it's important to kind of think of the staggering when you want those pollinators to come back, whether it's birds or bees or all the other insects, thinking about having things kind of stagger throughout the year. And also, it makes your yard happier. You have more to look at that way.
You're totally right. It's really a beautiful, beautiful thing. And one thing that most people don't think about when they're planting stuff is a lot of the cultivars or hybrids of flowers, doubles of flowers for certain things are not necessarily good for pollinators because they've been grown or bred for show and bloominess, if you will. And so it's interesting to think about how bees and flowers have co-evolved. Right, so the bee gets something from the flower gets something from the bee, and they've adapted over millennia this relationship between the two of them for specialization with some flowers and bees and generalization for other ones. But having those flowers that might look really showy and beautiful, they might not be very useful for a pollinator. So it's just another thing to think about.
And all of the messages in your film are really important, but I also want to touch on how beautiful the film is. So even if the subject doesn't interest you at all, you can mute it, and the film is just so beautiful. I left you a review today on Amazon, which we'll get into later because I didn't realize that those were so important to filmmakers. But I likened it to watching the slow motion bees is kind of like watching a ballet. It's just beautiful.
Well, thank you very much. It was one of my goals as a as a beekeeper and as a cinematographer, it's kind of my day job, is that I wanted to try and show bees in a way that most people hadn't seen them before. And so I used a lot of macro and a lot of slow motion, so you can see the bees really slow as their wings flap, and they kind of, and they are, it is like a ballet, and it's so beautiful to watch. I never get tired of them, of watching bees, because their social interaction, it's such a complex society that they live in, and I just find them beautiful creatures, and I really wanted to try and share that with people. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
And then my next question, I'm realizing my notes are a little bit strange, so I'm hoping you'll find the question in my question. I wrote down that people talk about the bee population dwindling, and I wrote goes back to World War II. So hopefully you could find in there my question.
Yeah, there's, touched a little bit on this before, but the changes in agriculture really happened after World War II, when we had, agriculture got much bigger, it got much more chemically dependent with fertilizers, pesticides, and the development of herbicides and fungicides in those, all those sides, if you will, are all considered pesticides. And so that made farming able to be done in a more simplified manner. And so there's been this change towards having a single crop, a monoculture of corn, of soy, of almonds, or whatever. And that is not necessarily the best for bees. It's easier for the efficiency of farming, but it's not necessarily the best way to go for insects as well as all other animals. And it's important for people that appreciate maybe birds more than insects, is that they go together, right? So many birds feed on insects, and so having that diverse life of insects in our habitats is important to bring birds back. And we're having a worldwide loss of insects, an insect decline, as well as songbird populations are really hurting. And there are multiple factors for that, but insect decline and bird decline go together really closely, and climate change is involved in there as well, the timing of blooms and emergence of insects and migration of birds. So it's very complex stuff, but we can all work to make it a little better, I hope.
A brand that I think people are really familiar with is Berts Bees, and I saw their name on your poster. I was wondering what the connection is. Were they just a supporter of the film? Were they in the film?
Yeah, they had Berts was an early supporter of the film. I through a friend of a friend, I was able to approach the CEO of Berts at the time, and we were looking. We had no money, we had no funding at all to get this film off the ground. And when I was gonna head out to do the original filming, I was literally gonna sleep in my car and bring my own camera, which I did anyway, and and fly in frequent flyer miles. And so we approached. I actually had a call with the CEO of Berts, and they connected me. And they loved the story, and they wanted to support. They have a big sustainability aspect to their company, so they were great supporters and cheerleaders of ours. There's nothing associated with Berts in the film, and they had no editorial input in the film at all. But they said, we want you to tell your story. And so I'm grateful for them for that.
That's awesome. And speaking of your story, I know that you're a beekeeper. Was that your sole motivation for creating this film, or how did it come about?
Yeah, so I've been keeping bees, backyard bees, for about 30 years, and my whole life I've had a really strong interest in the natural world. I grew up, outdoors, wanting to know what lived underneath this rock or in that tree, watching birds, gardening. All of those things are all together for me, and so I thought that this might be a way to combine my craft as a cinematographer, my interest in bees, and I have a great interest in the food system and agriculture. And I really thought, maybe I could take a crack at telling this story. I felt like the idea of these commercial migratory bees had not been fully told to the general public, because it happens mostly at night and mostly in remote places. And people don't realize how important these managed honeybees are to our food system. And I thought that was a great way in to tell that story about the problems with bees in our food system, and also give some ideas about maybe suggesting ways that we might be able to do it better. And so we have some people in the film that are doing alternative, regenerative and sustainable farming techniques that is very enlightening and empowering.
And I have a quote from your press release, and I think if you get anything out of this interview, if you don't watch the film, if you get anything out of this, 1 in every 3 bites would be impossible without pollination from bees. I think that is fascinating.
It's a staggering thing. And one of the things that I love about this topic is that it affects each and every one of us. As we jokingly said, it only matters if you eat. So every time you sit down to a meal, 1 out of every 3 bites that you're eating is something that was pollinated by a bee. And that's an important thing to take home, because, you think about all the delicious, and the things that are pollinated by bees are the most delicious and nutritious parts of our diet. There's wind pollination, and those crops, the ones that are common for us, are corn, wheat, rice, soy. Somewhat soy benefits from bees, but they're not solely pollinated by bees. So, but the nutritious stuff that we eat, the fruits and vegetables and nuts, and also alfalfa, which feeds dairy and cattle, is pollinated by bees. So that's these things all come together every time we sit down and eat, and it's an important takeaway.
And let's sidetrack for just a minute. What is your background in filmmaking? I know that you have a long history of documentary filmmaking, and where did you get your start?
For some reason, I had a drive to be a cameraman. It's what I wanted to do since I was a kid, and I have no idea why. I grew up watching National Geographic and Jacques Cousteau, and I thought that would be a great way to earn a living. And so I kind of found my way there. I went to NYU Film School, and I worked as an assistant camera person for years. And then I moved up to a cinematographer, and I do a combination of documentaries, commercials, and feature narrative films, although I haven't done a feature narrative in a while. And so I love it because it's always different. And I learn so much every time I go to work. I parachute into somebody's life and learn about it. And whether it's somebody who's, working on a car, or doing botany, or painting a painting, I just love that kind of constant educational aspect to the job. And it's just fantastic. So I love it. I'm just really happy.
And speaking of diving into lives, I noticed in IMDb that you just recently worked on an Ella Fitzgerald movie. Is that out? Is that coming out?
Yeah, it's out right now, actually. It's out. They're doing, everybody's distribution in the film business has been disrupted this year because of the pandemic. And so that film was supposed to have a big release nationwide, and they're doing it virtually and digitally. And so you can find, it's Ella Fitzgerald, just one of those things. And it's actually out in cinemas digitally now, so you can watch at your own home, but also help out your local cinema. And I know there's some up near where you are that are benefiting from that. So it's a really good thing, and it's a beautiful film. It was a real treat to work on that.
I feel like just from the title alone, you can hear that song in your head already. It just makes you want to watch it.
It's just an amazing story, and I'm happy to see that she's getting the recognition that she deserves. I mean, she's just unbelievable.
And back to the pollinators, what is your hope for this film? Now it's out there in the world now because digital, you can reach all kinds of places that you weren't before. What do you consider your main mission behind the film?
Well, we wanted people to see it. We have we're doing available digitally on all the major platforms: Google, Amazon, iTunes, and then we will ultimately have a subscription release on one of the subscription services, but I'm not allowed to say anything about that yet. And as well as educationally, we're doing, it's available educationally through a company called Collective Eye, for universities, and also through Canopy. So we're finally able to bring it out to a broad audience, and we have had such great luck with it over the time since we last spoke, of going to these community screenings and sharing this film with people, because most people don't know the story behind it. And it's really been heartening and enlightening to connect with people about their food and bees. And particularly in this pandemic time, the mantra that we had that, last year when we talked to audiences at festivals and screenings alike, is that, one of the things that you can do is support your local farmers, support your local economies, whether it's a beekeeper or whether it's a CSA or a farmer's market. Then you can really make a difference by supporting those local economies and supporting those local farmers. And that has become so true during this pandemic, at least where we are here in New York, that the most of the community supported agriculture farmers have reached their quota for the year. They saw this coming and they planted accordingly, and they're doing well. And connecting people to their food in the natural world is really a goal, and we really want to try and make that happen for people. So we're delighted that people are getting out and seeing it, and we're thrilled that we can bring it to people's homes now, during this crazy time that we're in.
And I think also if there's any teachers listening or watching, I don't think we're getting back into classrooms at full capacity anytime soon. And so I know that you're all looking for digital options. I think showing this film would be really great for the kids. And I was just thinking too, just watching documentaries in general right now, I'm thinking kids are so lucky these days. I mean, think about how close you get to the bees. I'm thinking back to when I was growing up, just falling asleep because documentaries were so boring. And I think we live in a great generation where you guys get to give us glimpses into fascinating things that we wouldn't get to see ourselves as children. I think kids are super lucky now. And so I think this is a great one to show kids.
Oh, thank you. And we are going to be doing, one of the things that we're working on is a shorter version of the film. It'll probably be sub 60 minutes. So that'll be much more useful for traditional class time for high school, middle school, and we're even going to do a primary school version of it. So we're very excited, but we've got a great response from colleges in particular during over the last year. Colleges have really responded to it. It's a subject matter that touches so many people, beekeepers, of course, but also anybody interested in ag and food and the environment. And we're just, we've had such a wonderful response from people in all those constituencies.
And speaking about it being available digitally, I touched on this a minute ago. Something I didn't think about until I read your email was that reviews on, say, Amazon and iTunes can really help a filmmaker out. So do you want to give your plea for the reviews?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a funny thing. I was told that that if people rate a film well and also do a review, it helps in the search algorithm of how shows are presented, how films are presented in all of these services, and particularly Amazon and iTunes, I'm told. So, so we always tell people, if you like it, let us know. If you don't, well,
maybe keep your mouth shut.
Yeah. We've had wonderful reviews. It's the most rewarding thing for me as a filmmaker is when somebody says to me or writes, I look at my food in a different way, or I look at my environment in a different way, or send me a picture of a bee that they saw somewhere. And I realize that, you kind of, our greatest gift is to be able to sort of adjust the lens, if you will, for how people see the world through what we do. And that is so rewarding. And I've just had a great time with that.
And before I let you give out all your links and things, I have one more quote that I wanted to share. So you did an interview, and I just loved the title of it. The Pollinators, this film only matters if you eat food.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we had some really good press over the last few weeks with our digital release, and that was really good. I think that was with Bill Moyers, that piece, and
Yeah.
and Bill's been somebody that I've worked with a lot over the years, and he's been a great supporter of the film. So he's a dear friend. So it was great to connect with him on that. I also would like to say that in your neck of the woods, one of the subjects of the film, Susan Kegley has a farm. And she's a organic chemist and expert that is in the film, but she also has a farm in Santa Rosa. So she's great, and she came to the screening in Sonoma when we were there. So she's become a dear friend.
Wonderful. So we can support her too. And
Yeah.
we have been talking to Peter Nelson, the filmmaker behind The Pollinators, which is now available everywhere digitally. Do you want to give out some links? How can people follow you, follow the film, find your other films?
Yep. So we are, the website for the film is called thepollinators.net. And on there are links to all of our social things. We do the whole spectrum of Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and all of that. And the film is available through on iTunes, Amazon, Google Play, Vimeo on demand, and a bunch of other ones right now. So, but there's a link on our website to all of those. So, yeah. So hopefully people will see it. We've had just a wonderful response to it.
Well, thank you so much for coming back to the show and chatting with me again. This is kind of one of the fun side effects of being quarantined is now I actually get to see the people I'm interviewing for the radio. So that's fun.
That's great. Well, I'm really thrilled to be back. It's great to see you again. And tell me what your daughter was doing at Bee Project, I believe, if I remember correctly.
Oh, she was for her Girl Scouts. They were they went out to a winery and they planted a pollinator garden trying to get some bees to come in. Yeah.
Oh, great. That's awesome.
So now we just work around our yard trying to get the bees to come in.
Well, that's good. That's a worthy goal. Yesterday I was outside in my yard and I was just looking down at the ground because I'm always looking for, insects. And just in a square foot, I saw 4 different bees in our yard on clover that we have planted. And it's just, that kind of thing is really, it's a minor thing, but it's very exciting to me to have that habitat for all these bees and pollinators. And I just think that if we can look more at the natural world, and in this pandemic time, it's a great time to do that, to connect with nature. That's where I'm finding my solace, is to get outside and enjoy the natural world. So.
Yeah, I was going to say that's another wonderful side effect of this whole thing. It feels like everything's moving fast forward in slow motion, and we all have time that we didn't have before, but we also don't have time. But one of the things that I'm finding comforting is spending time outside, just looking at what we're growing. And you're going to see a whole world that you didn't know was out there if you just sit in your yard for a while.
You're absolutely correct.
So I invite everybody to do that.
Yeah, it's such a dynamic and wonderful thing, and healthy for all of us to do that.
Well, thank you again so much.
Yeah, thanks, Kat. Really appreciate it.
Bees are so fascinating. When you first go into a beehive, you're like worried about getting stung. And then as soon as you start watching them and seeing them on the combs, communicating with each other, it's just so fascinating, so complex. And it mostly works until we get in the way of it.
Populations of honeybees are dying at levels that are unprecedented and very concerning. Close to half of the colonies in the U.S. dying every single year.
Native pollinators have disappeared and farming has become a lot bigger, and so due to all this, now they need beekeepers that can move bees from one place to the other.
We can learn a good deal from bees about the health of the landscapes that we inhabit, and we can learn a good deal about the folly of setting up our agriculture in quite the way that we have.
Agriculture is an interruption of a natural system, but it can be done thoughtfully as an interruption of a natural system with great benefits.
It's going to take 20, 30 years for that ground to get back in the shape it was to sustain life for all these wild insects, birds, and fowl, and everything else.
Protecting the land around us, protecting the soil under us is really our obligation. And from that, we get delicious, nourishing products.
We've been pollinating fruits and vegetables and nuts since the 70s, 60s, 50s. And we haven't had these kind of losses. We're not bad beekeepers, we're just trying to hang on to our business.